This presentation will cover Chapter 1, the Art and Science of Economic Analysis. This chapter examines why we study economics and introduces some important economic concepts we will use throughout the semester. The basic economic problem is that wants are unlimited while the resources to satisfy those wants are scarce. This scarcity problem forces us to make choices. We cannot have everything we want. Economics studies how people use their scarce resources to try to satisfy their unlimited wants. To better understand the economic problem, we need to define some key terms. What do we mean by resources? Resources are the inputs or factors of production that are used to produce goods and services. There are four categories of resources. Labor is the broad category of human effort. Labor includes both physical effort and mental effort. Labor is scarce because the time that can be allocated to various tasks is scarce or limited. The second category of resources is capital. Capital is human creations used to produce goods and services. There are two types of capital. Physical capital includes tools, factories, machines, highways, and other manufactured items used to produce goods and services. The other type of capital is human capital, which is the knowledge and skill people acquire to enhance their labor productivity. The third category of resources is natural resources or land, which includes land and all other natural resources such as bodies of water, trees, and oil reserves. The final category of resources is entrepreneurial ability, which is the talent required to come up with a new product or find a better way to produce an existing one. In order to get resource owners to supply the factors of production, they receive payments for the use of their resources. The payment for each resource has a specific name. The payment to labor is known as wages. The payment for the use of capital is called interest. The payment for land and natural resources is called rent. And the payment or reward for entrepreneurs' talent is called profit. There are four types of economic decision makers in the economy. Households are consumers, since they demand goods and services, and households also own all the resources and supply the factors of production. The other decision makers are firms, governments, and the rest of the world, which includes foreign households, firms, and governments. Firms, government, and the rest of the world demand resources and supply goods and services. Markets are the means by which buyers and sellers carry out exchanges. The interaction of buyers on the demand side and sellers on the supply side determines the market price and quantity. There are two types of markets. The first type is product markets, which are markets where goods and services are exchanged. An example of a product market would be the market for cars. Resource markets are markets where resources are exchanged, such as the labor market. The circular flow model is a simple model that shows how economic decision makers interact in product and resource markets. We will start with a simple circular flow model that focuses on the primary interaction between households and firms. Later in the semester, we will add the government and the rest of the world to the circular flow model. The model shows our two decision makers, households on the left and firms on the right. Firms produce goods and services using the factors of production, while households own the factors of production and consume goods and services. The diagram also shows the two markets. The product market is on the top and the resource market is on the bottom. In the product market, households are buyers and firms are sellers. In the resource market, firms are buyers and households are sellers. Firms demand resources from households in order to produce goods and services to sell in the product market. Households supply resources in the resource market in order to earn income, which they use to buy the goods and services in the product market. The blue outer loop in the circular flow model represents the flow of services between households and firms, while the gold inner loop represents the corresponding flow of dollars. Economists are interested in how people make choices. Economists assume that people are rational, which means that people try to make the best choices possible given the available information. This means that individuals try to make decisions that maximize the expected benefit achieved with a given cost, or minimize the expected cost associated with a given benefit. Another important assumption economists make about how people make choices is that economists believe that people make decisions at the margin. Economists believe that economic choices are based on a comparison of the expected marginal benefit and the expected marginal cost of the action under consideration. The term marginal means incremental, additional, or extra. Economists assume that people make decisions incrementally. For example, when choosing which courses to take each semester, students generally start by choosing their first course. Then they decide whether or not to take a second course by comparing the incremental benefit of taking another class to the incremental cost. Some of the costs associated with another class would include monetary costs such as tuition and books, as well as costs such as time needed to study and the opportunity cost of not being able to work while you're in class. The benefits associated with an additional course would include fulfilling the requirements of your degree program, getting you closer to graduation, as well as benefits such as getting the schedule of class times you want. Students keep adding classes incrementally or marginally until they decide the cost of adding another class exceeds the benefits, at which point they would stop adding classes. This is an example of marginal decision making. There are two branches of economics, microeconomics and macroeconomics. Microeconomics focuses on individual economic choices and how markets coordinate the choices of economic decision makers. Microeconomics is concerned with the individual pieces of the puzzle. For example, in microeconomics, you would study consumer choice theory and theory of the firm. Macroeconomics, which is what you are studying this semester, focuses on the performance of the economy as a whole. We will look at the overall production of goods and services in the economy, as well as the employment level and the average price level. In macroeconomics, we are really looking at the big picture. Economists are social scientists who use scientific analysis to develop economic theories or models to help explain economic behavior. An economic model is a simplification of economic reality. Economic models focus on the important elements of the problem. A good theory or model will help us make predictions about the real world. When studying an economic issue, economists follow the scientific method. The scientific method, which you probably are familiar with from high school, starts by identifying the problem and defining the relevant variables. For example, you might be interested in looking at the relationship between the supply of oil and the price of oil. You then specify assumptions. Some important economic assumptions include rational behavior and marginal analysis. The third step is to formulate a hypothesis or a theory about how key variables relate to each other. For example, your hypothesis might be that if the supply of oil decreases, the price of oil will go up. You then test the hypothesis. If the hypothesis is supported, then you will use the hypothesis or theory until a better one comes along. Or you can reject the hypothesis, modify your approach, and start over at step 1. Economists are also concerned with policy. This often involves examining how the economy should work. we need to be able to distinguish between a positive economic statement and a normative economic statement. A positive economic statement is an assertion about economic reality. It can be supported or rejected by the evidence. It is either true or false. A positive economic statement is concerned with what is. A normative economic statement, on the other hand, is an opinion. It cannot be proven true or false by evidence, and it is concerned with what should be. Let's look at some examples of economic statements and decide whether they are positive or normative. For example, is this statement positive or normative? Minimum wage laws cause unemployment among teenagers. This is a testable statement. It can either be supported or rejected by evidence. So this is a positive statement. What about this statement? The government should increase the minimum wage. This statement is concerned with an opinion, what we should or should not do. It cannot be proven true or false, so it is a normative statement. We all need to be aware of some common pitfalls that lead to faulty economic analysis. The first is the fallacy that association is causation. This fallacy occurs if we assume that event A caused event B simply because event A occurred before event B. A simple example will illustrate the problem with this type of reasoning. Suppose you are a car salesperson and you notice that several months after buying a minivan, couples often have a baby. Can you then conclude that buying a minivan is what causes people to have babies? Obviously not. In fact, in this case, the causality is reversed. It is the later event that causes the earlier event. People buy the minivan because they are expecting a baby and will need the extra room. A second pitfall is known as the fallacy of composition, which assumes that what is true for the individual is true for the group. As an example of this fallacy, consider the problem of school carpool lines. When my children were younger, their school carpool lines were notoriously long. A friend suggested that I could avoid the long wait if I just arrived 5 to 10 minutes before school got out, and then I could be first in line. This approach would work if I was the only parent to do this. But what if every parent does this? Then you would just add 5 to 10 minutes to the carpool process. The final pitfall is the mistake of ignoring the secondary effects or unintended consequences of an action. An example of this fallacy is related to safe driving and seat belts. Seat belts are mandatory in all cars to help make people safer. However, there is evidence to suggest that because people feel safer, since every car has seat belts, they have a tendency to drive more recklessly. This was obviously not the primary purpose of passing these laws, but rather a secondary effect. It is important to try to avoid these three fallacies in our economic analysis.